Hi, Zach.
Hey Tyler.
How's it
Hey.
going? Is it snowy where you are?
It's not too bad. There's a little snow back
Yeah,
here, but not too bad.
yeah, where do you live?
I'm in Marlborough, Massachusetts, but we're right now I'm in Chelmsford, Massachusetts with my in-laws.
Okay, okay. Yeah, we have a cottage in Pennsylvania in the Poconos. So that's about the snow that we have. It's like people have started ice skating a little bit because the lakes freeze over, but I just sent my children out for an hour. I called it survival
Sir
camp.
Thrival.
I was like, can you just bundle up? I gave them each two cookies to put in their pocket, and I was like, if you survive an hour, I'll give you a third cookie. But they didn't last very long, but
Right.
whatever.
And real quick, do you have a hard stop in 30?
No, no.
Okay. Yeah, we can go a little bit longer. I think my next call is at 3:30. So I have a
Okay,
hard stop
okay.
at an hour. But I'm thinking we'll record the podcast and then usually I end up kind of talking shop with
Yeah,
all my
yeah.
all my internet friends on here.
I know. It's like we do exist. It's always nice when I just recorded a podcast at I recorded it at 1 o'clock, and the host was the same, that she was like, okay, my listeners wouldn't be interested in this question, but can I talk to you about this and this and this? So
Yeah, what does your monetization look like? How are you getting brand deals? Like, what did you have to do to get your book deal? All those.
I know. It's like
What?
what's the actual mess that life is right now. I know. I
Yeah,
know.
we'll talk about that at the end. Okay. I'm debating whether to jump on the Riverside, but I feel like my headphones work better with Zoom, and then I'll just put it in Riverside later for the
Okay. Yeah,
magic.
either way.
All right, well, I'm gonna put on my podcast host voice for a minute. Are there any questions that you like specifically would really like me to ask, like are good layup questions for you?
No, I think we can
I'm
take
probably
out
gonna,
however
yeah.
you want to
All right.
take it. I'm totally fine with.
And I think talking about I'm sure your publisher and or you would really appreciate, we focus a lot on like the things that you talk about in your book, right?
Yeah, I think so. And chapter 5 is the chapter that's titled Stop Doing All the Work, which I think is just, I mean, I feel like that also would relate to your audience, that it's
Yeah.
like, you know, I think digging into that obviously is, but whatever. I'm fully ready for whatever.
All right. All right, let's do it. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the Zach Think Share podcast. I'm excited today. I have Tyler Moore with me. A handful of you, I'm sure, are already following him on Instagram as Tidy Dad. Me and him were introduced to each other back a couple months ago as dadfluencers. The author that interviewed me about the New York Magazine article originally asked me about a bunch of other things, and then she totally pivoted and decided to talk about me as an influencer, sort of, rather than the actual content of what I talk about. And me and Tyler were the sort of headliners of that article. So Tyler, it's been great to meet you over the past couple of months. It's been cool. First off, one of the things that I was excited for is your book coming out. You actually did your own audio for the audiobook, which I have a lot of feelings about. As you heard a couple of my rant messages via DM, but I think from what I've seen of your content and what I would say my impression has been is you are a teacher that's been teaching for a long time, family of five, three young children,
Yeah.
and you help people talk about, you help create language for, you help contextualize how to manage the clutter in your home, how to manage the cleaning in your home. And I think it's a refreshing perspective of a lot of your audience because it's coming from a man, and men are not typically like me. They're not the ones talking about mental, and they're typically not the ones talking about the cleanings. From that bio, what's missing that you think, someone that's never heard of you, it might be good for them to know about you?
Yeah, no, and thanks for having me. I've been following your work for a long time, and I think that the conversations that you elevate are so important. And I think that, the one thing that I always add into my bio is that like life hasn't always been tidy for me. And I
Mm,
think that that's something that a lot of listeners can resonate with too, because I think that especially in this like Instagram era that we're in, and as like dad influencers, and that article, it was a really interesting article because I feel like as dad influencers, we're still, I'm not saying that we're this endangered species, but we're this like group that no one really knows what to do with. And I think that,
Mm,
we're sort of navigating this space and lifting up conversations, but like, you know, just like the majority of people, like I'm a dad who's experienced my fair share of messes. A lot of my messes were, thinking about my own sort of mental health, that for a long time I was really able to present that life was sort of perfectly put together and tidy. Like I had followed sort of all of those straight line trajectories that you sort of think of, that you know, I got married. I wanted to move to New York City. So my wife and I moved to New York City. I wanted to go to graduate school. So I chose one of the best ones in the country and got a master's degree at Columbia University. When, my school thought that I would do really well on the administration track. So they like recruited me and offered me this position. We had two daughters at the time. Life should have seemed picture perfect because I had ticked off all of those boxes, but yet a huge mental health sort of breakdown on the sidewalk of New York
mm,
City, right across from, you know, a 24-hour nail salon and right next to CVS pharmacy, was sort of that breakdown moment that then led to this tidying journey that I've been on. And so I do think it's important to start with that at first, because I think that there are lots of people who experience their fair share of messes. And I'm just fortunate that the first thing that I did was I called my wife. I had the help of a therapist and I went to therapy for 3 years just to unpack, why am I feeling the way that I am? Because I just felt so alone, just in the struggles, and I didn't have anybody to talk to. So having that therapist was such an important outlet for me to begin to unpack the huge
yeah.
mess that I was in.
And I think so many of us, we go to our wives for emotional labor, right? So
Yeah.
when you had your breakdown, she was the first person you called. One of the things I'm working on right now that I've committed to Alyssa is to work on getting a therapist, because now that most of my job is emotional labor, doing like working with people on their marriages, the conversations are heavier and more
Yeah.
impactful than they were as a software salesperson.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so having someone else that professionally does emotional labor for people is something that I'm seeing. One of the other things that I've been working on in my own life is seeking out emotional labor from the men in my life, which has been hard. One, because I think so many of them are not used to doing that kind of emotional labor of being a shoulder to cry on, being like a friend. I know that, the tidy dad is more necessarily than being like physically tidy in a home and being clean. Where do you see your relationships with other men improving the mental tidiness that you almost kind of speak of?
Yeah, well, I think it's like one of the blessings I feel like of being in New York City is that I often find myself like on the playground, and you immediately sort of like run into those dads or other parents that you know, it's like your friends go to school together, you go to church together, you sort of gravitate towards one another. And I am finding that you know, I think that men, stereotypically, we sort of get this bad rap of like that I don't know, that we only have like a handful of emotions that we feel, which is like
Mhm.
we can feel, happy, we can feel like disappointed, or we can feel like angry. But it's almost like when I saw Inside Out 2, and
Mhm.
when she was like unpacking anxiety, and there was this moment where I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm actually seeing this like physical representation through a children's film of the anxiety that I have dealt with," but it gave me a language to then be able to like speak to other dads, because they often and also have a variety of feelings that they are sort of unpacking, that there is these struggles around career and family and time. And what does it look like to still be a good friend to people? What does it look like to be a good like son to our parents who are getting older? What does it look like to want to like just work out or have alone time or feel like you can sit down to read a book? Like I do feel like, I feel like now we're able to, or we have a little bit more freedom to share and express some of those feelings that we had. But if I can look back when sort of had that mental health breakdown when I had a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old at home. I didn't have any dad friends that I was confiding in or
Mhm.
saying like, these are all of the struggles that I was having. I mean, luckily I had my dad, but I remember calling him and telling him all that was going on. And what he said to me was like, Tyler, you're just too young to be this unhappy. And I was like, what does I was like,
What do you do
let's
with
pull
that?
back the layers of that because I was like, does that mean that there's an age where it's okay to be
Happy,
this
yeah.
unhappy? And let's just even unpacking the like happiness, this idea of being happy or not. Like sometimes we think of these as like two sides of this balance scale, but yet happiness has so many gradations of colors and layers in between that need to be unpacked. And so I am learning like with my dad friends, it's like I've sort of changed the questions that I'm asking, or that it's
Mhm.
like, you know, you sort of try to unpack like what's actually going on with like family right now, or are you, are there things that you're struggling with, or like how are you trying to balance things, or even admitting to myself, like, or saying to them, like, I had another huge anxiety spell. Like I was like, I just felt like I just went through this whole spiral and had to step out of it. Like, has anything happened like that to you? And I feel like when we vulnerably share, then like the men in our life feel a little bit more comfortable vulnerably sharing. But
Mhm.
sometimes it takes a while to establish those relationships, but not every, life isn't perfectly put together all the time.
Yeah, and I think like being able to share vulnerably, I think is one of the things that has made my messaging palatable for a lot of people. And I know right now I'm working on my book proposal. I self-published a book some years ago. It was like a sort of generic self-improvement book. And there are a lot of moments as I was writing it that I felt like I was like, shoot, I can't even write this chapter right now because I'm not walking the walk that I'm writing about. As you've been writing your book, what have been because I'm sure there's one chapter in there that like you're like, I'm stuck on writing this chapter because I'm not living it while
Yeah.
trying to write about it. What have been some of the hard moments of writing your book in like walking the walk while you're writing it?
Yeah. So one of the things that I just did a couple weeks ago, because I had this like online virtual event for people who had pre-ordered the book, and it was kind of cool because as a sort of existential exercise, I created this like double timeline for myself. And I'm a teacher, and so we use double number lines all the time, as a like mathematical strategy. But like the double number line, I was like, can I pair up moments from this book writing process of the past year? Can I like pair up moments of inspiration along with like what was happening at the same time that I was writing the book? Like what were some of those big deadlines? Because like as a writer, like you have to stay equal parts inspired and also have the like practical writing at the same time. So there were things like I went to yoga every Sunday. I like climbed the top of one of the tallest buildings in New York City with my mom, where you can like lean out over the edge. Like we went as a family on this, epic 3 country trip to Switzerland and Germany and Austria over our February break. Like I started stand-up comedy classes. Like there were things that people were like, what are you doing? Are you going through some sort of like, like midlife crisis? And I was like, no, I'm not going through a midlife crisis, but I was like trying to be inspired so that I could then write. And I was trying to
Mhm.
draw, meaning from all of these different experiences. But the hardest part for me was, I call it now the messy middle. It was between the second manuscript draft and the final draft, where I knew this is the last shot. Like, this is it. You have to get the book from where you think it is right now to where you actually want it to be for readers. And we've all had moments like this in life, whether you're like writing a book or not, but you tangibly know that what you've produced isn't to the quality that people expect it to be. And you're questioning, like, am I actually going to be able to get it there? And then at the same time, as I was going through that sort of like crisis with writing at school, because I'm a teacher, full-time teacher. Last year, I negotiated a 4-day teaching schedule. And so at the same time that I was working on this, final push of the book, my school told me that they weren't going to allow me to teach 4 days again the following school year. And that
Hmm.
basically I had a decision I had to make. Was I going to teach 100% of the time? Or was I going to teach 0% of the time? And I had been at this school for 13 years. There are all these feelings that come up of like, why aren't they just giving me this? Don't they know how hard I've worked? Don't they see me as an asset? Why would they only offer me either 100% or 0%? Why are they doing this to me? Don't they see how hard I'm working? My kids went to the school. I'm like, don't they see what a value we are to the community? And I started having again those anxiety spells. My anxiety always physically manifests itself, so it's always this deep burning in the back of my eyes. I started getting sick to my stomach. The walking to school with my children would trigger anxiety panic attacks where I was like, I mean, it's not nice to talk about, but like throwing up on the way to school. But I was like, my life is mirroring what I'm writing about in this book, because here I am writing about here's how to tidy up your life, while my personal life at that moment was feeling so messy. I it actually ended up being a blessing now looking back, because it gave me a lens through which to look at the tips that I was sharing, the vignettes that I was drawing, the metaphors that I was using. And I was like, somebody who's really in the depths of their own mental health crisis right now, can they see a way out through the tips that I'm sharing? And can I take my own advice? And
Yeah.
so I did. One of the decluttering steps that I talk about is this idea of, in order to declutter, you have to first clear the space, then you have to sort the stuff, then you have to assess what do you want to keep versus what do you want to move out in order to make a plan for moving forward. And I had to sit with that mess. And my school said, like, what are you going to do? Is it 100% or 0%? And I said, I can't tell you that right now. We still had 6 weeks left of the school year. And I was like, I don't know. And for the first time, I really allowed myself to sit with that mess. I did not have to immediately go to the plan, because people were
Hmm.
like, why don't you just become full-time tidy dad? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And I was like, because I don't want to be full-time tidy dad. I love teaching. I love being at the same school as my children. I love the connection that I have to my students. I don't want to do this.
Hmm.
And then, halfway through that month period, my youngest daughter's 3K teacher, we had her final parent-teacher conference, and she had been trying to recruit me to my daughter's school all year long, because I had the older two at my school. Then my youngest daughter, Margaret, was at a school 6 blocks from our apartment. And she was like, the fifth grade teacher's retiring. This is a great school. Have you thought about whether you would like to switch? And I was like, my goodness, an opportunity has just presented itself to tidy up my life in a new way. So I went in for the interview, got offered the job on the spot. And what actually ended up was that, you know, I was at one school, the day was much longer until 3:45. This new school gets out every day at 2:20. The commute, instead of being 30 minutes each way, is now literally 5 minutes each way. I started to run the math, and I was like, oh my gosh, this 100% at the new school is actually getting me, much closer to that 80% that I was working when I was only teaching 4 days a week. And when I
Hmm.
started to think flexibly that, like, sometimes in life there's not a plan A, or there's not a path A or a path B, but sometimes there's like a third way that you can't even imagine. I was like, that's actually what tidy up your life represents. So I've been trying to walk the walk and talk the talk. Like, writing was really hard. And then having this existential crisis of, what do I do when the school that has been my home for the past 13 years sort of turns its back on me? And now I have to start brand new when I'm launching this book into the world? Is this really what I'm going to do? And navigating switching schools for my older two children as well. But I did it. And so I do think that now, talking to you and for listeners listening, like, I'm an author of Tidy Up Your Life, but I've been walking the walk and talking the talk. Like, I have been tidying up my life in a new way that I could never have imagined. And it really did come from sitting with the mess that was, once again, anxiety spirals that is just sort of a part of me as a person.
Now, I have a question for you because I feel like there have been a handful of moments where I've been, in your words, kind of tidying my life, I think. So I made the jump right back in January to do this full time, and I had a short 30-second stories. I had the opportunity to do a collaboration with Kristen Bell. The day that I was supposed to have my very last day as a salesperson, I was supposed to close a $50,000 deal, which results in a $2,000 paycheck for me out of commissions. Lunchtime, I pretty much have a day to close this deal. If it doesn't close, then it goes to the rep that takes over my territory. I get an email at noon saying that they have a couple more questions. I'm like, damn, this isn't going to go through. And Kristen Bell's assistant, 45 minutes later, just happens to email, says, hey, could you jump on a Zoom call like right now? And it was like one of those moments of the universe telling me like
Yeah.
this is what you're meant to do full time. So the last 2 hours of my paid software job, I got to talk to Kristen. But the decluttering, I think of my life, I think in the way you're describing it, sort of like making it work for you, seeing where seeing where the time and the effort that you put into the different things fit so that you're meeting your needs, you're meeting the obligations that you have for your family and the commitments that you have for them. I know I have a ton of privilege as I've grown up in a mentally healthy home, white, middle, upper class, tall, cis het man, pretty much check all the boxes of privilege. What do you think is now? I can imagine some readers reading your book and being like, okay, he's got some privilege that makes it a little bit easier for him to declutter some of his aspects of life. Like when I was a teacher for my 8 years, I jumped around at 5 different schools. I cannot imagine with any of them somehow like bartering for a 4 day work week. I can't even conceive of that. Where do you think the privilege that you've had has helped you out, and or what is the underlying messaging that still rings true whether you have privilege or not?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, one sort of note before I answer is that it took 9 months of negotiations from the start, the initial conversation to my very first day of being off for my like writing Wednesday. And then when I asked for it again, I refilled out sort of like all the paperwork. And the response was, what, are you going to need this for the next 15 years? Like, you're going to need this until you retire. And my response back was, no, I'm just asking for this for the next year. Like, I just really needed
Uh,
this. And it was interesting sharing that story on Instagram because so many women were like, that's what my employer did when I told them I was pregnant. Or that's what my employer did when I told them that I wanted to work part-time. They were like, it was like my employer, there was immediate like flip of the switch when I asked for something that was different based on the values that I sort of have. And so, when it comes from, thinking about privilege, it's like, yes, there were some safety nets, in at play. So it's like one, before I sort of made that decision and was wrestling with what do I do? Obviously as Tidy Dad, we're able to bring in money, there's certain things that we're able to do. I'm able to share cleaning products, robot vacuums, all of that, all of those exciting things like, writing the book. I got a book advance. Like there was money there to fall back on. And so from a place of privilege, like, yeah, one of the decisions that was on the table, or one of the options that was on the table was, do we just take our savings and do we just live on this for a little bit? And do we sort of see where can Tidy Dad go? So that is a place of privilege to feel like from a resource standpoint and even from an education standpoint. Because my wife and I were often like, if push comes to shove, we're going to be okay. Like, I'm a teacher. I'm a male teacher in New York City. I have my ENL license, which means that I can teach students with diverse language needs. But like being a male elementary school teacher comes with an incredible amount of privilege because we're like, there aren't many of us left in some circles. And my
Yep.
wife, she's an occupational therapist working with special needs students. And like that is a great need in our city as well. So like we did have some things that we could fall back on, supportive families. But yet, I do think sometimes when we are struggling, it's like that is part of making sense of the mess, like drawing out what you just talked about. Like we do have to sort of like check any sort of like privilege or resources that we have. But that also doesn't mean that we have to discount what our thoughts and feelings are. Like it was really hard to wrestle with saying goodbye to the school where I was for 13 years. That was a huge tidy up my life moment. When I stepped foot for the first time
The
into
only
my
thing I've done for 13 years or more in my life is live with my parents. There's nothing I've done for 13 years besides that.
no, it's such a long time. And so when I then had to step into a brand new school building this fall and navigating not only new policies and procedures, but new curriculum, new sets of students. There are so many unwritten rules at a school. I'm the only male classroom teacher in that school building. We have the music teacher is a man and the PE teacher is a man. So even for the kids, for my students, I'm the first male teacher that they have had. And so them trying to figure me out and who is this guy and where did he come from and how long
Let's
has he
test
been
some
here?
boundaries.
Test the boundaries, but also when the kids see me, like that I have my three daughters at school and them recognizing that I'm like a dad and a teacher, that immediately sort of softened them to me. But like, it isn't easy to tidy up any aspect of your life, but I have learned, and it's the whole first chapter of the book is like, you have to first make sense of the mess. Like you have to sit with your mess before you then try to make this plan as to what to do. It took all that was in me not to immediately say, if you can't give me those 4 days, then I'm done. I'm gone. It took a considerable amount of mental strength to be able to say, I'm going to have to come back to you. I don't know what I'm going to be able to do next year, but
Hmm.
like I'm gonna need some time to think because my ego was completely hit. And so often as men, it's like if we aren't seen as competent or capable or caring, like we immediately sort of like give up. But it's like I really have had to lean into that messiness in order to then figure out like what's the best path forward.
Let me ask you this. I know you're not necessarily coach, but I'm sure there's some coach in you as a teacher. So let's say I'm reading your book and I'm taking coaching from you sort of on implementation of it. How would you talk me through like making sense of in like sitting with a mess? I'm trying to think of a mess in my life that I'm working on.
Yeah.
So we just moved, we just paid off a ton of debt by selling the house. I feel like there's a lot of ways you can go with the word mess. I feel like I went to a wedding this weekend and saw that I did 19,000 steps that day, mostly from the dance floor, but realized also I haven't looked at the app in a long time. I probably am doing 1 to 2,000 steps a day on average, which from what I understand, like even my mom in her 70s is doing significantly more than that on.
Yeah.
So I would argue that my health and/or typical athleticism is a
Yeah.
mess right now. I don't think our house is a mess necessarily, but like the amount of clutter and stuff we're getting rid of is at least whelming, if not overwhelming. What would you say to me to have me to, let me rephrase that. If I were trying to be with my mess, how would you know that I was or was not being with my mess?
Yeah. So, you know, for me, I try to think a lot about the stimulus and then the response. And this was actually an exercise that I had to do with my own therapist because when I was at my darkest in terms of my mental health struggles, that was when we had a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old. My wife and I were like sharing child care responsibilities. She was working part-time. I was a dean at my school, so I would literally run home from school. She would hand me the girls so that she could go do her part-time sessions. I was doing like dinner, bath, bed by myself so that she could get in those evening sessions. She would then come home. It was then like we were on repeat mode. But oftentimes when I came home, that transition from her handing the girls off to me was particularly messy because oftentimes I would walk in and I would see a home that was, now I've come to understand, is like sort of normal in terms of the stuff that you would see out, the activities that the girls were engaged in. But I had just come from a really stressful day of dealing with discipline issues with kids, managing teachers, supporting the paras at our school, everything that goes into managing a school. And I would see something as soon as I walked in, and I would then immediately respond, which was like, let me pick all this stuff up, or asking questions that sort of had like a judgmental tone, not even taking time to greet my wife or greet the girls. I just immediately went into action, which then triggered my wife and all of these feelings of like, but you don't know what went on today. You don't know what happened. And one of the exercises that I had to work on with my therapist was this idea of stimulus and response. And can I begin to increase the time between the stimulus and my response? Because even the response of me, like, let me just start putting stuff away, I thought that that was well intentioned. That it's like,
Mm.
I came home, I'm like starting to do, like, I know that you've been busy with the girls all day. But my wife took it as, can't you just come in and like stop and start playing with the girls or
Yeah.
talking to me about my day or greet me? And so sitting with the mess to me is, can you create some space in between the stimulus and the response of immediately going to action? And can you begin to even just ask yourself questions of like, what do I notice? What do I
Yeah.
see?
See, what do I
What am I
smell?
feeling
What's
in
my
this
body?
moment?
What are the body
Yes.
sensations that I'm going
Yes.
through as I see that there's some Play-Doh
Yes.
out and a little bit of this
Yes.
already
What is
embedded in the
this?
rug?
Yeah, like yes, like what is this making me think? What is this making me wonder? Like I know that those sound like simplistic questions, but I have learned that there is power in using those questions oftentimes to just calm yourself down and recenter yourself, because oftentimes if you take just a little bit more time, there's always more time than what you think. And if you actually just take time to parse out, why are you thinking the way that you are? Why are you feeling the way you are? That then sets you up to actually deal with that mess in a much more powerful way than if you just immediately like react and try to get into action mode.
And part of what I'm hearing too is, so you're saying to be with one's mess is to allow the stimulus to happen. But when we're not being with someone's mess, what we're doing is we're taking the gut reaction that we have, or we're the stimulus of seeing it, smelling it, being clung on to by a child, feeling it, and then we are going into probably some kind of problem solving mode, which is our over time has become our default response to it. And so being with the mess is pausing in between the stimulus and response. I sounds like ideally having some meditative thoughts around it where you're zooming out. It's funny you're mentioning this as I think this is week 5, module 4, I think, of my mental mastery curriculum, where I talk about the definition of
Uh-huh.
mindfulness is just the space in between stimulus and response. Developing mindfulness specifically around your internal reactions to what your mess is.
Yeah, and it started with like my therapist Suzanne was like, "Can you just set a 5-minute timer?" And like as soon as it comes in, as soon as you're like walking up the stairs to your apartment, put on your 5-minute timer and know that once you open that door, you're going to greet your wife, you're going to sit down, you're going to play with your kids, and then get a sense of like, how has the day unfolded? You don't have to offer judgment. You don't have to ask questions. Oftentimes, you just sitting down, you're going to gather a lot of information that then will help to inform what are you actually going to do as a response? And that to me was power. And it's something that I continue to do now. Because even like the decluttering example is like when people see a mess, like if your garage is all messy, people are immediately like, I'm going to go to Target, I'm going to go to Walmart, I'm going to buy those huge big bins and that shelving system. And like, I'm just going to come back and we're going to pile everything in and then we're going to get those shelves and it's going to be amazing. But then people find that, like, my gosh, like the leaf blower doesn't fit inside the like bin that I just bought it. Or why do we have all of these rakes? Why do I have all this sports equipment? Like all this stuff is outgrown. Whose is this? And then you immediately descend into blame, embarrassment, regret. You're like, why did I waste all this time and money going to buy these bins? This is never gonna, fix things. And then you're like, we gotta move. We need a bigger garage. So that's obviously catastrophizing things, but like that happens to us all the time because we see the mess and then you immediately want to go to the plan of like,
Mm.
what am I going to do to fix it without actually taking time to like clear the mess, like clear things out. What do you see? Then begin to sort it and then assess what do you want to keep versus what do you want to move out. Like there are so many parallels to our mental health and our physical spaces. So it's an important distinction.
I want to go to one of my favorite questions to ask people that come on here, which is, and it helped me identify my ideal clients back when I first started coaching. Of all the DMs that you get, I'm sure there's one or two archetypes that you probably typically get that put absolute flood you with joy. I know for me, it's typically hearing a man say, "Thank you so much for like making the videos that you do. It's really helped me and my wife talk much better about each other and like me seeing things and like our relationships getting a lot better just from your videos."
Yeah.
Who is the person, like, what is the story that they share with you that is like one of your favorite messages to receive?
Yeah, one that I received recently it was from this mom who lives in Brooklyn in New York City, and she was like, "Thank you so much. Like for what you share, my husband and I have been debating whether we want to have a third kid, and like you guys and what you've done in your apartment, it makes me feel like a third kid is possible, and we don't have to give up the life that we love here." And I was like, that message, it resonated with me because I think that there are so many layers to that type of message that I think that, as dads, we know how parenthood just completely reshapes your like head and your heart. But there
Mm,
are always those like practical questions of like, is the life that we love going to be sustainable for our children? Are we making the right decisions? We're always sort of second guessing career and family and how we're sort of, it's not even balancing it, just trying to fit everything in. And so whenever I get DMs from people who feel like their definition of what is possible is just stretched a little bit, I feel like that's where there has been power. And like the flip side of that is like the empty nesters who are such an interesting, sort of like group of people. And then now there's a switch. Gretchen Rubin is someone who I really enjoy following, and she now talks about this like it's not an empty nester, but it's more of this like open door sort of like season where your kids are navigating back in. Your adult children still need you as a parent. It doesn't mean that they're gone forever. But when people are like, you've helped me sort of sort through all of this stuff that I've held on to for all of these years. And I feel like I'm starting this new chapter of my life without all of the clutter and all of the mess. Like that's what feels, I don't know, just reassuring because as tidy dad, like people are like, do you think that everybody should just live in a small New York City apartment? And I'm like, no. First of all, because then all of our rents would raise even more than they are. But no, I don't think everyone needs to like move to New York City. Or they're like, do you think that every kid should share a bedroom? And I'm like, no, I don't. You know, like there's so many sort of boundaries or things that they try to put on the content that I produce, but it's because I've always produced content that's like shown from my perspective. And I feel like if anything, as Tidy Dad, I'm like a mirror. And it's not that it's the perfect example that's reflected back. I just feel like people see themselves in, you know, whether it's the struggles over our three daughters sharing a bedroom, or lately it's been all of the fake fingernails that I'm finding all over my house and that are like stuck to my socks and they just drive me nuts. Or it's the like discovering like a month ago that I could walk home from school on my lunch break and enjoy 30 minutes in my house alone for lunch while all three of my children were at school. Like that is
Wow.
power. And
Yeah.
those are all invitations for people to begin to think about like, what's an aspect of my life that I can tidy up? And that makes me feel really happy. And then the flip side, what's funny is I have a lot of grandmas, and it's no shade at all to the state of Texas, but I have this group of grandmas from Texas whose adult children have moved to New York City. And I think that they're secretly sad about their children moving to New York City. So they take out their frustrations or their questions on me as Tidy Dad because I'm this dad who lives in New York City. So they're constantly like, why is your closet so small? I think you'd be so much happier if you just had a bigger apartment. Like, why don't you just move back home where your parents are? And I'm like, I think that you're projecting some of your feelings onto me,
Oh, that's so funny.
So it's just,
So funny.
it's funny. But
Yeah, I know there's a handful of women in my comment section on a consistent basis that are very trigger happy towards divorce. I posted yesterday about a man that opened up or allowed his children to open up the Christmas gifts and he recorded it, but his wife wasn't there to watch it. It sounds like sleep is a tough commodity for her. And the question I asked at the end was like, what kind of conversations do we have from here? And there's so many comments saying just nope, divorce, game over, end of story. That is so interesting that there's such a specific group of Texas empty nesters that have sons in New York
yeah,
City.
well, and what I've had to learn is that, and even going back to how we started with that like dad influencer article, like you never actually know until the piece is published the angle that it's going to take.
Yeah.
And I've been on the receiving end of some wonderful press, and I've been on the receiving end of some not so wonderful press, but I do feel like our job is to get people talking. And oftentimes it's less about the content that we created, but more so the feeling that seeing that content brought up. And I've had to realize that like, it's not about me. Like
Mm.
I've been sharing as Tidy Dad for 7 years now. Like, obviously this book is coming out. I have no idea. I cannot control how this book is going to be received. I can't control the reviews that people write, but I have learned to develop, I don't know whether it's tougher skin, but it's more so recognizing that those comments, it really is not about me. It's about something else that may have happened to that person, or it triggers something in them that
Yeah.
it's like when the Gen Zers, they all got very upset about my bunk bed situation, that my daughters have triple bunks. And they told me that all my children were going to resent me, that if I couldn't afford a bigger space, why did I have all of the children that I did? And I was just like, I would love for you to, do you want to do a deep dive on my finances? Because actually, it's like, why are we leaping to all of these conclusions? And then I was like, oh, this isn't about me. This is about
Mm.
these like 17-year-old Gen Zers who I've now learned like aren't really my target audience.
Yeah. Yeah, and they have a perception of how much money they have to have in the bank, how much space is required for children. I mean, even as I'm thinking about this, we have a 3-year-old, and we're thinking about getting pregnant again this year to have a second. And we just moved back into a two-bedroom apartment, and we are sleeping in the same room as our 3-year-old. I don't currently know how we're going to manage the second one. Currently, the second bedroom is an office that Alyssa and I share as
Yeah,
we both work remotely.
yeah.
So that will be very interesting. I want to ask one final question, which
Uh-huh.
is it's going to be a little different than I think the way that I typically ask it is. I often ask a lot of momfluencers I have on here that are creating change, that they're trying to make the world a more equitable place, I think similar to what I do. And the question I often ask, if we were to unionize the dad influencers and you got to pick for 6 months, what's the campaign, what's the messaging that we're putting out there in the space to move forward, to create progress? What's the message?
Yeah, so I think one, it's like related to the home space. I feel like there are a couple. One is it's a line in the book that this section, that whether it'll be controversial or not, I don't know. It's this idea of mess knows no gender, but also I feel like household work knows no gender.
Mm.
That, you know, one of the videos that I posted that went viral, and it's always interesting when things go viral on Instagram because the first set of comments are always typically like positive, and then when the flip has been switched and when Instagram or TikTok, whatever, decides to send it to not your audience. And then that's when you get all the
Really pissed.
questions. And
Yeah.
like one of the things that went viral that I'm grateful for years ago, but it was my weekday cleaning routine. And it was a video of me scrubbing my toilet. And the first set of comments were like, send me your routine. This is really cool. I think I could try this. And then it immediately switched to
Why is his dad scrubbing by?
why is he cleaning his toilet? Then it went into questions of like, that it's all
He's a
these
simp.
questions
He's a
of
beta. You know, he's not getting laid at home.
yes. Then it
Probably
goes
getting divorced soon.
into, all these questions of like sexuality and masculinity. And I was
Mm.
like, actually, in my house, like my wife and I are both fully capable of scrubbing the toilet, but like there's so much work that has to be taken on that like I said on my list of things, I'll scrub the toilet. Like it's as
Mm.
simple as that. But, I even put this in the book too, that it's like I don't want my daughters to ever be in a relationship someday where someone says, you should be the one who's scrubbing that toilet, not me. I'm not doing it.
And you don't want them to be like, oh yeah, that is normal. That sounds about
Right.
right. That I'm the only one that does it. Yeah.
Right. Because they're like, I would hope that they would say,
No,
one,
my
don't
dad did
talk
it.
to me
That
that
doesn't
way.
make
And
any
two,
sense.
my dad scrubbed my toilet the entire time that I
Yeah.
lived in his house. So I do feel like, I don't know, there are still so many pervasive stereotypes within the home that even, when that society's judgment of home and organization still falls on the shoulders of women. And even just there are questions around masculinity and relationship status when someone says, oh, my husband does the cooking or my husband does the cleaning. It then opens up all of these questions that it should, I hope, someday just be this like, yeah, because people just talk about the work in the home and they divvy it up. And there's so much that has to be done. So, like, let's just figure out how it gets done and then move on. So, we'll see.
Tyler, Tidy Dad Moore, thank you for joining me today. They can find your book, Instagram, TikTok, all the socials
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
Tidy Dad.
Tidy Dad. Yeah. And then I have a website, thetidydad.com, and then books available wherever books are sold. And you can get that audiobook that's read by me.
Oh yeah.
So you can listen to it as you tidy and clean and organize and do all the things.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think you'd if we had more time, I would say chapter 5 I'll have to dive into more because I know it
Yeah.
sounds like that'll be kind of up my alley if
Yeah.
for what I
Yeah.
talk about. Well, Tyler, again, thank you for coming today. It's been a pleasure talking with you, especially since we're sort of accidentally introduced to each other as two of the dadfluencers back a couple months ago. Yeah, I look forward to watching how your author's journey goes, as well as a teacher. So I was a nomadic math teacher for about 8 years. So it's cool seeing another guy doing well in an elementary school. Um,
Thanks.
thank you for coming.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right.